my boots on and lace them up. A hard work, not another day to work. A hard work, that's what they say. Hard work, hard work.
Dorothy is focusing on, she's getting her doctor's degree in nursing. She's in her second year, and she focuses on infant development and behavior and the relationships that they can form. We talked about resources that she's used, and she mentioned that she and her cohort met with Val for 4 hours their first day. Yeah. And it was kind of overwhelming, but it was great, but it was overwhelming. And then she was the only one of her cohort that immediately followed up with Val and took advantage of learning more about what's going on. And the rest of the cohort waited until spring when they were forced to do it. You know, so it's interesting to think about the follow-up that I need to do with my faculty, because yes, I meet them when they're brand new, you know, their eyes are wide and all that. We talked about the importance of collaboration with reference librarians to get out of your information rut, because we all have a certain way that we do things, and we go to what works. We go to PubMed or whatever, and that you're multidisciplinary. So you come into your program from a certain background, and that's the approach you're taking, and you really need that neutral outsider to help you broaden your approach and your thinking and your language and how you do the searches. Data, got to back it up and back it up and back it up. We talked about the IRB. She said the IRB wouldn't like the ways that I'm backing it up, and so it's important to meet the security concerns of your IRB and so on. Access to resources can be restricted. She talked about places that she's worked in the past where nurses had access to this, doctors had access to that, and nurses couldn't access what the doctors could access. So being aware of barriers to your population, to the people that you're serving. Emails, they're bombarded with emails, and she doesn't even open emails if she gets them from people she doesn't know. So that relationship that you build with your patrons is very important. So they'll open your emails, they'll know who you are, and remote access for her level of research, because she lives 45 minutes away and has a very full life. So it's very important that her access be seamless.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Group two?
Thank you.
There's someone who's going to speak for group two. Come on, Donna. Come on down, Donna.
Put this here.
Find a little spot to clip.
Okay. So this is interesting because I love hearing all the different topics of research. We met with Bridget Z, and she's an entomologist, and she's in her 4th year of grad school. And she studies caterpillars from a particular subfamily of moths that she showed us. She had a Peterson's guide, and she showed us drawings of the moths, and they're rather large, different colors, but kind of drab-looking colors. And I'm sure, you know, looking at the images, I recognize them. She said they were very common, and interesting part about her research is that it's not funded. It's basic research, and she said it's the type of work that doesn't really interest many funders. So some of the things that I've always kind of thought about, like funding requirements, don't really apply to her work. She's not really mandated to follow funding requirements. And a lot of her work is very self-driven, and these moths are everywhere around. So she can sit at home and on her front doorstep and collect the moths. What she's really interested in is taxonomy, and the fact that these moths have not been classified correctly, and that there's disparity in how they're being named from one place to another. So they're looking into, just as we learned yesterday with evolutionary changes in the tapeworms and studying that, it's similar to what she's looking at with the moths and the caterpillars. So they're doing both, like morphological observation of the caterpillars and the moths, as well as DNA studies.
What was the name of your student?
Bridget, and her last name started with Z. It was So they do some collaboration. There's a group over at Wesleyan that does studies some of these moths as well. And they find that very helpful because the moths, when they're caterpillars, they grow very rapidly and can change drastically and shed their skin multiple times before they even become a moth. So they might not even be recognized as the same animal from one stage to another. So they rely kind of back and forth on sharing findings with a group from Wesleyan. And they're collaborating with a lab in Finland. One of the grad students who her advisor worked with is now over in Finland, and this lab is doing some of the DNA testing. So they're really sharing resources. She uses a paper lab notebook, and she said some of the challenges in their lab are that they have the physical specimens, which she calls a database of drawers, where they pin the, the moth specimens, and also Excel spreadsheets, text files, and paper lab notebooks. And she said it is a real challenge, kind of putting that all together, and on lots of files of JPEGs. So she does find it very challenging, and one of the topics we brought up were electronic lab notebooks, and she said, she thought that would be a really interesting way to be able to incorporate a lot of her JPEGs into that form. So I think that's about what we covered.
Thank you. Group 3, thank you.
Thank you. I'm not sure. Can you hear me? Yep. All right. I was like, I'm not sure I actually need this because my normal state is bellow. Okay. We had a second-year grad student in ecology and evolutionary biology who was studying disease in bats. And I actually got a lot out of the conversation. I thought it was really interesting in terms of not necessarily what she was studying, but her research process. She starts with Google Scholar because it's easy. Basically, everything she does in terms of her research and her research methodologies is informed by her lab mate. So she asked her lab mate, well, what are you doing? What are you using? She's using Mendeley because her lab mate used Mendeley and liked Mendeley, things like that. So I thought that was really interesting. She also organizes things chronologically by lookup date. And then she has a master list, cheat list that she uses, which I thought was also, just quite interesting. Some of the biggest things that was like, I need to think about doing this with my students, is she didn't know what ILL was. And she was like, how do I get this journal article if we don't have it? And I made her repeat after me, I will never pay for an article. But I also asked her a question in terms of what would happen if she backs up all of her data on a portable hard drive. And I asked her, well, what would happen if that hard drive failed? And she's like, I'm screwed. So we talked about cloud storage. We talked about the preservation term, locks, lots of copies, keep stuff safe, things like that. So it was pretty clear that, she's a very bright student. She's going to have a wonderful career, but that she is missing a lot of really basic, what we would consider to be really basic information preservation type of tenets, but also what exactly does a librarian do and how can a librarian help her, especially in the future. So I thought that was really good to know. On some level you know it, but then you don't know it until you've actually talked to someone and gone, oh yeah. So.
Thank you for that. I'll be addressing that.
So, no worries. So yeah, it was good.
Great. Thank you, JJ.
No problem. Thank you.
4. We have 4. Rep 4, if they want to come up. Group 4? You don't have to. Okay. Going once, going twice. Group 5. Rep from Group 5. Looks like it's you, Maxine.
I'm group 5. So we ended up doing a lot of teaching, and, and one of our group kept saying to Genevieve, we're not judging you, really. But it turns out that one of the things she struggles with is in her experimental protocols finding standards. And Kimberly Clark has some standards, but they're proprietary. And so she knows that there's an ASTM standard, but it wasn't, she couldn't get it here, so we told her to talk to Carolyn, and we thought Carolyn could probably get it for her. And then we talked a little bit about data management, and we asked about that, and she has some Excel spreadsheets that she uses, and she does work with a lab partner or somebody in her lab on the same project, and they have their own Excel spreadsheets, and they kind of share them. But you know, there's, as far as naming conventions, and she said we really should do something. We should get a data management, you know, and they back it up on the department hard drive. And
I want to point out here that the department that she was in was one of several that were singled out specifically for data management workshops all spring. And we had such low attendance from that group, we ended up canceling doing it for them because we couldn't get anyone to come.
oh,
What department is it?
oh, I'm sorry. She's in food microbiology. Yeah.
In fairness, she did say when she asked for PI
Yeah. Yeah. Her.
was not interested in data management.
Yeah. Her PI isn't interested. So.
Very common. I know that the UMass folks experience that. The grad students are worried because their life's on those hard drives. The PIs are like, you know, it's not my life on the line.
And the thing is that the PIs don't do the data management, the grad students do. So, and they're not being taught how to do it. So that was pretty clear. We also talked about never paying for anything. What else did I mean? Leaving anything else out here? Oh yeah, she does use RefWorks for bibliographic management. And right now she doesn't have her own account. She's sharing somebody in her lab partners, but we point out how she can export that. By the end, she was taking notes too. So.
Nice. Yeah, good sense. Great, good.
Is anyone having to leave imminently? Or can people wait a few more minutes? Is it okay?
kind of stuff.
It is.
It's 10 up.
So in 5 minutes, I want to do a quick run through these and then. Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. I missed your sweater. I'm going to just do this so we'll stay on.
Okay, thank you.
There you go. And it's
Can you hear me? Okay.
We met with a fourth-year PhD student who is doing research in plant molecular science. And what she's working on is has to do with tomato diseases. She has the process, we actually didn't discuss it in detail, but at least part of the process is to have a treated group.
Was that Alice or Joe's name?
Alice. Treated group compared to a control group, and they would compare the bacteria population on the treated group versus the control group. And the way they do it is to look at whether through gene expression. So she's basically working with molecular sciences. And she's actually really on top of things in terms of data management. When she analyzes her raw data, the machine actually automatically collects the raw data and shuttles it into an Excel spreadsheet. But it's very cumbersome for her to process it, so she is learning how to use the statistics program R to manage her data, and because she feels like she doesn't have the necessary expertise to properly use it, she's taking a MOOC to learn this. So I thought that was wonderful. And the way she protects her data is that she uploads it onto Dropbox, which is in the cloud, and she has it on her USB drive and also on a home computer. So that's like 3 different ways. And she was thinking maybe I'm being too paranoid, and Susie and I were like, no, this is great, you're doing really great. So the next step for her is to learn how to do RNA-seq, which is, as she told us, it was the next generation sequencing technique, and where you can get a snapshot of, the transcriptome and quantify for her experiments. So she's a little bit apprehensive about this because she's going to go down to NIH to get this done and learn this, and there's going to be a lot of software processing that's actually even beyond human control. And Dr. Garlick was with our group, and he offered some insights on how sometimes there's an extra layer of complexity where when you work with microarrays and gene chips and the like, there's some proprietary software processing that is actually not comprehensible to people who are not inside the company. So there's some concern about that, and perhaps when you negotiate, the purchase, there has to be upfront agreement that there will be support and continuation of this software analysis capability for a certain lifetime. Did I represent it correctly? Okay. And
Yeah. Do you have one more point?
one more point. DMP, really good to have librarians embed into a research team because then we can take care of the data collection, preservation, and just everything that keeps your data safe and secure for the long term. Okay, that's it.
Something, the thing that I took away from it was that she's working with a PI, a lot of grad students, and she's thinking about her data, but she's never seen the DMP from the grant that they're on. So she has no idea what they've promised or what she needs to be thinking of.
That's an issue.
Yeah.
Okay.
Carolyn went to the.
7? Also get 2 people for 7.
Yeah, let me just, because Donna and someone else may have to leave early, there's a couple points I want to make. Okay, so everyone remembers, you got to return your key to the housing desk, keys to the housing desk. Evaluations. I'm sorry?
Is there a deadline for that?
I have not heard a deadline. I mean, they're open till 11 p.m. They probably like it before that. But my guess is, 2, 2:30, 3. I mean, if you're here doing something, don't fret too much about it. But yeah, they want to get back. Evaluations for this session are the yellow ones. Please fill them out when we're done with this. After you leave, if you find you've lost anything, you have concerns or something, I think everyone has my email address. Feel free to send me whatever you need to send. I want to thank very much Mike, who has been doing reaching, not just doing the video, but also helping out with IT. You really went above and beyond, and we very much appreciate that. I want to thank our local team, Valerie, Sharon, June. I don't know if everyone's in here. They helped me for months ahead of time on this, working and putting everything together, so. Planning team also, I had a comment from several people about the great quality of this programming. That was done on the planning team. We figured out what we were doing, back in, November and January and March, so that was very much a group effort. Thank you very much. Excellent job. And a couple announcements. Val is offering to take people on a quick tour of the new nursing wing on the nursing building after this, or if you're interested, go talk to Val and you can figure out kind of when and where. And there is also a group, I think Sally, and I'm not sure who else is interested in, instead of going to lunch at the dining hall, going to the dairy bar, the real dairy bar, not just the ice cream out here, but actually where it comes from. So if there's a group who's interested in doing that, talk to Sally, okay? And
And I'd like to thank Carolyn Mills.
We'll finish up quickly.
All
right, so the student that we were talking to, she's actually a geographer. So she's studying urban geography and communities in urban areas. So that was a different departure from the things we've been talking about so far this week. But one thing that was interesting for her is that she comes from China. So she did all her undergraduate and her master's degree in China. And so we were asking her how that was different from working here in the United States. And she said one of the differences was that in China, her work was very directed by her advisor, so she basically just followed along with whatever projects her advisor was working on. When she came here, she had a lot more freedom to choose her own interests and her own direction, and that was very, I wouldn't say paralyzing, but in her first year she said it was very difficult for her to figure out, okay, I have to choose what I want to study, what I'm interested in. So that was very difficult for her. Although she said her data skills actually transferred pretty well because they used the same software. Her GIS software was the same in China as here. So that all transferred very well. So she didn't have any trouble with data management in her personal research life. In terms of sharing knowledge, she does teach. And she said that she taught a graduate level class, I think not currently, but she did before. And a lot of that involved teaching data management and data curation techniques to her students. So she was sort of imparting her knowledge with that. In terms of sharing data and storing data, she did talk a little bit about her data management plan and how that was a big shock because when she and her advisor had first started on their research, they didn't have to do that. And so in the middle, they had to come up with their NSF plan, and they had to learn together because neither of them had done it before. So it was kind of a shock. One interesting wrinkle with her is that she does a lot of personal interviews with different people to do her geography work. And so those interviews are confidential, and so she can't make that data publicly available. So for her NSF plan, she had to sort of bifurcate. The public data can be shared, but the personal stuff has to be kept secret. And so that also presents some difficulties in terms of preservation, because she can't necessarily just put that data out on a public repository. There has to be a way that she can make it private. And right now, she just keeps it on her local network and on her computer. And like other people have said before, that's not necessarily the greatest thing, because if something crashes, then it's gone. So for her, she has this particular challenge for how to store personal confidential data, but back it up in the cloud or something. And that's an additional wrinkle for her. In terms of library resources, she says Google Scholar is, again, her standby. That seems to be a common theme this week. She said she did use some of the more specialized databases earlier in her work, but now she's becoming so very interdisciplinary, it's hard to just go here, go here, go here. So Google Scholar is really simple. You just do one search and everything comes to her, she says. And in terms of citation management, she actually uses Zotero now, she said. She had used RefWorks because that's sort of the campus standard, but she was worried more about when she graduates and she gets her degree and she moves on, taking that information with her. I mean, obviously she could export it, but since Zotero is free and it's open source and all that, she said, well, I'll use that instead. So that's that.
Thank you. I'm assuming since I took notes, I should report. Opinions from Group A? Okay. Get your mic.
It takes me time. I've been using these for like 20 years and it's still hard. So we talked with Sud, who's a mechanical engineering PhD student, just passed his quals, going to hopefully graduate in fall of 2015. He works on microelectric packaging, so the packaging around things like pinned chips and surface mounted devices, which have a lot of mechanical failures. And so they're looking at new ways of packaging those to keep them, that basically increase their life. And one of the things, we first talked about sort of how does he do his literature searching. He and his lab mates use Google Scholar a lot. They use Google Scholar a lot, and if they can get the PDF via one of the sources Google Scholar suggests, they go with that. He's used the library some for things, used the links from Google Scholar to his library's holdings. And we talked a little about interlibrary loan, but mostly for books. There was a particular textbook he needed for, I think, quals stuff. And the copies were all on like an undergraduate reserve, and so he actually couldn't actually get his hands on a copy because the copies that he could have interlibrary loaned, he couldn't interlibrary loan because they were all on reserve. So that was one of those little, one of those things that you're like, oh yeah, that would never happen. Yeah, I totally understand why it happened. He said that his lab uses Scholar a lot.
He mentioned that there was a librarian that came to visit their lab to sort of give them an individual tutorial a few months ago because they hadn't been able to attend whatever other event had been scheduled because they'd had a conflict. We asked him what's kind of, difficult and easy right now. Oh, sorry, computer's acting up. Literature review is a little tough, still having trouble finding some older papers because that's where Google Scholar falls down. And doesn't have full citations, has actually seen a certain number of false, mistaked citations where clearly someone copied it from someone else's paper without actually checking it. He says about 80% of his lab uses Mendeley. That's just the version they prefer. And I asked, does it have all the citation styles for the journals you submit to? And he said, oh yeah. But other than some early papers, he said, we're getting what we need. Occasionally, we aren't going to get it fast enough because we actually have realized that we need to send something back in a few days. So we definitely heard that his work happens on a pretty short turnaround time. We asked when he learned to do lit searching and when he started having to do that. He did his undergrad in Bangladesh, maybe did a little bit of it junior and senior year, but has been doing more of it during his grad program here. He mentioned he uses Google Scholar alerts to keep track of when are other people citing our papers, when are lab groups we care about writing things. And then we asked about his data, and he said a lot of his stuff is in CSV and TXT files, and then of course he has all these papers he's keeping. And he's doing some combination of Dropbox, Google Drive, the computer at the office, or the computer in the lab, and the computer at home. So he has multiple locations, and some of them are cloud locations. And actually at the end, we were coming back here and he said, is there some other way I should be doing it? And I said, well, one of the great things to remember is the 3-2-1 rule, 3 copies in at least 2 formats and at least one of them off-site to protect against, your home or your lab getting hit by fire, flood, earthquake, whatever. So yeah, that's what we found out.
All right, great. 9, 10. No more? Oh, great, good. 10.
The lanyard's going to have to do because I don't have any place else to clip this. So Benouche is a second-year graduate student in medicinal chemistry. So her lab works on synthesizing new compounds, assaying those for biological activity against specific enzymes, and actually crystallizing those enzymes in complex with their compounds. So they're doing a number of fairly complex activities. We talked mostly about data, but also a little bit about lit searching. She uses Google Scholar. She also does use the NCBI databases, but mostly for non-literature information, so protein sequence and protein crystal homology structures. She uses RefWorks because that's what's available to campus, even though she prefers EndNote. She's not terribly pleased with RefWorks' tendency to crash her computer when she's trying to insert references into a paper. She does do some current awareness sorts of activities as well, monitoring journals in the field. We didn't get into too much in terms of specifics, but it's clear that she's doing some of that in addition to searching for specific material related to projects. And hopefully my partners in crime here will correct me if I get anything wrong or leave it out. In terms of data, the lab does have a data culture. It seems to be mostly oral, which is to say there's no written data protocol to describe where you put your stuff or how you name it. When you have a question, you ask a lab mate and they tell you. There are conventions, but they're just not written down and accessible in any objective place. The material is all kept available to everybody in folders that are specific to different people in the lab, and so you'll often move stuff from or make copies of stuff from a previous student's folder into your folder if you're continuing a previous project. There are no central plans for backups, so everybody backs up their material individually on their own schedule. Benouche has a portable USB hard drive that she uses to back up her own data, and understands very well that she would be screwed if she was to lose any of that material. I think that gets at most of what we talked about. Did I leave anything out? No? Okay, cool.
Just want to thank our presenters again for talking about citizen science, science literacy, and how we bring this all together with our data management practices. So thank you, everyone.